If you had told me about Resident Evil 7 Biohazard back in 2009, I probably wouldn't have believed you. Here's how that conversation would have gone down. I'm from the future, January 2017. Do you want to hear some crazy news? Okay. Donald Trump is president. I could see how that would happen, given our obsession with celebrity and society's tendency to conflate wealth with authority. Okay. Resident Evil 7 is a first-person shooter, and it's playable in VR. Get the out of here. Resident Evil is the granddaddy of survival horror games. The series is 21 years old. Cheers. And over that time, Capcom has produced 24 games, spin-offs and actual franchise titles within the Resident Evil series, and there's even a whole film franchise that has surprisingly endured for a long time. So the games, Resident Evil games, focus on the T-virus. And this is an infection that generally turns people and animals and other creatures into violent, undead mutants. And it also focuses on the corporations that are trying to use this virus to overtake the world, or whatever they want to do. Capcom defined survival horror with the original Resident Evil game back in 1996. And then they continued a trend of just kind of bolstering this entire genre and moving it forward in really cool ways, especially with Resident Evil 4, which is widely considered just one of the best video games of all time, let alone a good survival horror game. That said, there have been plenty of terrible games in the Resident Evil series. We're looking at you, Resident Evil 6. So, building off of some recent failures within the franchise, Capcom really had to prove that they are still a powerhouse of the survival horror genre. They need to prove that they can still terrify any player, that they're still innovative, that they can still push this genre forward the way that the original Resident Evil games have. And with Resident Evil 7, they did it. Resident Evil 7 is a spectacular survival horror game. It's a first-person shooter, which is new for the franchise. They're generally third-person perspective games. And the game is more compact than other games too. The entire thing takes place in this cavernous house that's filled with a demented undead family that's just out to kill you. The game mixes slow, controlled exploration scenes with, rapid fire, action-packed, suspenseful jump scares and hand-to-hand combat and shooting. It's definitely a Resident Evil game. It's just in a new perspective. However, first-person horror isn't exactly innovative nowadays. Games like Amnesia and Outlast have shown that first-person horror games are marketable and they can be powerful, polished experiences. So in that way, it feels like Resident Evil 7 is at times trying to emulate these newer games rather than blaze its own trail like the series has in the past. That's where VR comes in. Resident Evil 7 is innovative in that it's one of the first AAA mainstream games to actually be fully playable in VR. This is almost unheard of for the industry right now, and it's not surprising considering how risky it is to develop a full game for VR. The virtual reality industry is still in its infancy, so as much of an accomplishment as it is to see Resident Evil 7 in VR, it's also a huge risk for Capcom. For example, the first time I played the Resident Evil 7 demo in VR at E3 last year, right after the game was announced, I got incredibly sick. And I never get VR sickness, I don't get motion sickness, but this game really knocked me down. And it was the first time I'd ever experienced VR sickness. So now that Resident Evil 7 is officially out, we're gonna find out if I will still get sick in VR. I'm gonna put on the headset and give it a go. So I am in Resident Evil 7 in VR, and I just went through the VR tutorial process, and that's where the game warned me that I could experience discomfort if I maybe move too quickly next to like a wall or something, and to use my head to look around, but if I can't, I can use the right stick to look around. So these are factors that could impact, virtual reality sickness. where you're moving your head to look around, and then if you switch to the stick to move around, your brain might get confused, and maybe that's where the sickness comes from. There are so many different factors that go into VR sickness that we don't really know what the main culprit is yet. Compared with the standard version of the game, just playing on the TV, which is all I've done so far. This is, I mean, it's one-to-one recreation. It's absolutely the full game in VR. I'm in first person, like my hands are holding a shotgun. And I'm looking at a torture dungeon filled with bodies wrapped in fabric hanging from the ceiling. So that's exciting. Now, one thing it looks like they did change from my demo is the actual turning. When you use the right stick to look around, it turns in 30-degree intervals instead of actually smoothly turning like a standard game will, and like this game does in standard mode. So that might be an effort to combat that motion sickness I felt. Because if you're not, oh wow, that's creepy. If your head is moving maybe in these stilted bursts in the game, maybe I won't get a 6, so maybe this is the fix that I needed and wanted. Oh, thank you, Jack. It's not as scary the second time around. That's still a huge axe, though. Oh, God. I don't like that at all. No. Like, I have a shotgun, but I know using it is just going to waste my ammo. Because he's unkillable. Run, 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 run. So this guy that I'm fighting, you can't kill him. So this is just going to be me running in circles for a while until he decides to give me a chainsaw. Please don't. Please don't. Okay, so using the new right stick that they've implemented, where it turns in these 30 degrees intervals, it is still hard to keep your head facing forward. Oh man, this is getting intense. Oh, okay, that hurt a ton, thank you. This is probably the best spot to test out VR because it's literally me running in a circle around a bunch of swinging objects while also being terrified of a madman trying to kill me. Okay, he's gonna get his awful, terrifying pincer tool. Oh, that's not scary at all. That looks great, yeah. I have a chainsaw. Where is he? Oh my god, this is awful. Not in like a VR way, just in a, this is terrifying. How do I survive this? Oh, I don't. That's how. I don't survive it. Oh my god. So now I'm just gonna kind of walk around because this is what got me in the demo. It was just an exploration, really. It wasn't like an action demo. It was just walking around the house and getting scared, you know, because your brain thinks something scary is gonna happen, which, surprise, it does eventually. So I find myself using the right stick to turn my head a lot because turning in VR, like, if I want to go down this hallway straight, I would have to keep adjusting the camera to make it actually track my head that way and track my body correctly. So you have to use the right stick a lot, actually. There's really no way around it. You can't just stop using it. So that might be one of the problems with a big game like this in VR. That could get pretty tedious, and it is pretty disorienting to just keep having to turn 30 degrees every time I go down a hallway. And the one thing with this headset too, there's no real motion tracking in the game. Like there's no head tracking, I mean, in the game. Ooh. Ooh. Yeah. So when I lean forward to like look at a wall, the screen actually shifts instead of moving my body with it, and that's actually making me not feel very good at all. I am sweaty, I gotta say. This is how it started last time. It's the only reason I bring it up. I'm getting a little flushed, I guess. But that could be wearing a big headset on my head as well. It's hard to say. Yeah, I'm definitely getting the sickness. I'm down with it. It's down with me. It's happening. It's not totally unbearable yet, but I'm very, very warm. Ah! Okay. I think the experiment is not failed. It's definitely a success. Because I'm feeling a little sick, and this is about the amount of time, honestly, I would want to play VR Resident Evil. Like, this is not a game I want to play fully immersed, surrounded in this creepy house like this. Just because the controls are so awkward for turning. And Capcom has said that. They've said this is the VR aspect of Resident Evil is meant to kind of demonstrate what VR can do and how it can be used in games. And that makes sense to me because this is intense and almost sickening. I'm on the verge. I'm not quite there. So that was Resident Evil 7 in VR. Overall, it was really cool. I mean, it's great to see a first-person shooter in VR, that it's fully realized. It's an entire game that you can play. It's very polished. I mean, this is obviously a current generation game. However, I would not play the entire Resident Evil game in VR. It's simply too disorienting. It's a little too complicated. The controls are a little clunky. Turning your head with the right stick still doesn't quite work for me. And in the end, I started getting the VR sweats. So that is the precursor to the VR pukes. I wouldn't recommend playing all of Resident Evil 7 in VR, and I don't think that's really what Capcom intended here either. The full game is playable in VR, you can do the whole thing that way, but it's just a little clunky, and it might make you a little sick, just because that's where VR is right now. However, for a first showing, for one of the first, if not the first, AAA game fully playable in VR, fully made for VR, Resident Evil 7 is a great game. And then, Resident Evil 7 is just a great game, period. Take it out of VR, and Resident Evil 7 is a wonderful horror game, especially for the Resident Evil series. This is a new take on Resident Evil, and it's innovative while still feeling very current, and it's terrifying as hell, to be quite honest. So, Resident Evil fans, play through to the end. It does pay off. It's definitely a great game. And everyone else, strap in. Oh, he just ripped my hand off. Again, actually. Oh, yeah, this isn't good. I just died.